Have you ever heard of the Edomites? This mysterious people, mentioned several times in the Bible, are described as adversaries of Israel, with a reputation for being brutal and ruthless. But their story goes far beyond battles and rivalries. The Edomites have a curious origin. They descend from Esau, the brother of Jacob, the patriarch of Israel. How did a people with such close family ties become one of Israel's greatest enemies? And what happened to them throughout history? Do descendants of the Edomites still exist today? In this video, we will dive into this fascinating history full of twists, conflicts, and mysteries. Get ready to discover what is truly known about the enigmatic people of Edom. To understand the story of the Edomites, we need to start by talking about Esau, who is the patriarch of this people. The Bible tells us that Esau and Jacob were twin brothers, sons of Isaac and grandsons of Abraham, one of the great patriarchs of faith. Even though they were brothers, their lives took very different paths, and this difference created a rivalry that lasted for many generations. From this rivalry, two nations emerged: Israel, which came from Jacob, and Edom, which came from Esau. One of the most important moments in Esau's life was when he decided to trade his birthright for a plate of lentils. This was an impulsive choice, which showed how he did not value spiritual blessings. In Genesis chapter 25, we see that Esau, tired and hungry after a day of hunting, asked Jacob for food. Jacob, knowing the importance of the birthright, offered the plate of lentils in exchange for this right. Esau, without thinking much and in a hurry, accepted the deal. Although it seemed like a simple exchange, this act had great spiritual significance. In the Hebrew context, the birthright was not just about inheriting property, but also meant being the spiritual and social leader of the family. In the case of Esau and Jacob's family, this right included the promises God made to Abraham and Isaac, which now would go to Jacob. By giving up the birthright, Esau showed that he did not value God's plan and the spiritual inheritance that could have been his. He traded something very important for an immediate desire, putting his physical needs above eternal promises. This impulsive decision affected not only his own life, but also the history of his descendants, the Edomites, who became enemies of God's people. But it is important to remember that even before Esau was born, God had already chosen Jacob. In Genesis chapter 25, when Rebekah felt her twin sons fighting inside her womb, God told her that there were two nations within her, and that these two peoples would be divided. One would be stronger than the other, and the older would serve the younger. This was fulfilled in the lives of Jacob and Esau, and also in their descendants. After Esau traded his birthright, the relationship between the two brothers became even more complicated. Following the plan of his mother Rebekah, Jacob deceived his father Isaac to receive the blessing that should have been Esau's. Esau became very furious. The Bible tells us that he began to hate Jacob and even planned to kill him when their father died. Although Esau and Jacob reconciled later, they went their separate ways. Esau chose to live in the mountainous region of Seir, which later became the land of Edom. Genesis chapter 36 tells us that Esau took his wives, children, and belongings to live in a land that was not part of God's promises. His descendants became the people of Edom, who, throughout biblical history, had many conflicts with Israel. Even though they were blood brothers, spiritually, the Edomites came to represent those who reject God's plan and choose to oppose his people. This opposition from the Edomites reflects Esau's choice, who rejected the birthright and God's blessings. Esau and his descendants settled in a territory south of Israel. This region was already inhabited in the second millennium before Christ, and it is believed that they mixed with the peoples who already lived there, becoming the dominant group. For this reason, the entire people came to be called Edomites. Early on, the Edomites organized themselves into tribes and later formed a nation. They even had kings long before Israel. The land where they lived was mountainous and received little rain, so it was not very fertile. Even so, they cultivated some areas, planting wheat, vines, and olive trees. It is believed that the Edomites also mined copper, as archaeological excavations have shown that the region where they lived had large mineral deposits. These mines were an important source of wealth for Edom. With these resources, they could manufacture weapons for their army and also trade with other nations, which made them an important people. Trade was probably the Edomites' main economic activity. The territory of Edom was located on a trade route called the King's Highway, which connected Mesopotamia, Egypt, and other major economic centers. Controlling this route gave the Edomites an economic advantage, as they could charge fees and ensure the safety of the merchant caravans that passed through. The Edomites are also mentioned in sources outside of the Bible. Since all their written records were lost, what is known about this people comes mainly from Egyptian, Hebrew, and Assyrian sources. At the height of their strength, the Edomites expanded their territory across Transjordan and built several fortresses that had a communication system between them. The geography of Edom, with its high mountains and deep valleys, served as a natural defense against invaders. Cities like Bozrah and Selah, which later became known as Petra, were in almost inaccessible places, surrounded by rocks and cliffs, making their conquest difficult. This allowed the Edomites, even though they were a small people, to maintain their independence and successfully protect themselves from external threats for a long time. The religion of the Edomites, like that of many ancient peoples, was influenced by the beliefs of the Canaanites and other neighboring peoples. This means they adopted religious practices from the Canaanites, Moabites, and Amorites with whom they had contact. Initially, the Edomites worshipped several gods, but they had a main deity linked to war and the weather, similar to the Baal of the Canaanites, who governed storms and fertility. Over time, especially after being conquered by John Hyrcanus in Idumea, the remaining Edomites began to follow Jewish monotheism. As already mentioned, the Edomites initially lived in clans and tribes, something common among Semitic peoples of the time. However, over time, they adopted a system of government with kings. This may have been influenced by neighboring peoples or a response to the need to centralize power to face external threats. Because of this, the Edomites managed to organize themselves as a nation before Israel, which gave Esau's descendants some advantage in the beginning. In the Bible, the Edomites are shown mainly as enemies of Israel, even though they were brother peoples. One of the most notable episodes that shows this complicated relationship occurred during the Exodus journey, when the Israelites were on their way to the Promised Land after leaving Egypt. At a certain point in the journey, they arrived at Edomite territory. In the book of Numbers, chapter 20, we read that Moses sent messengers to the king of Edom asking for permission to pass through their land, promising not to damage crops or use their resources. Moses even reminded the king that the two peoples were brothers, descendants of Esau and Jacob. However, despite Moses' friendly request, the king of Edom firmly refused passage. He not only said no, but also gathered an army to ensure that the Israelites would not cross his lands. The Israelites had to make a great detour through the desert to avoid passing through Edomite territory. Despite this, God forbade the Israelites from hating their Edomite brothers. Edom's refusal to help Israel when they needed it most was one of the reasons why, later, the prophets condemned the Edomites harshly. The cooperative relationship that should have existed between the two nations was destroyed, and instead, their history was marked by rivalry and wars. When Joshua divided the land of Canaan among the tribes of Israel, the land of the Edomites was not invaded, and for a time, there were not many conflicts between the two peoples. Centuries later, during the monarchy period, King Saul fought against the Edomites. although some of them also served as his soldiers. Later, during the reign of King David, the Edomites were defeated, and many of them were killed. The Bible tells us that Joab, the captain of David's army, stayed 6 months in Edom until he had eliminated all the men. However, some Edomite warriors escaped and sought refuge in Egypt, later becoming a problem for King Solomon during his reign. The conquest of Edom was very important for the economy of Solomon's reign, as it gave him control over profitable trade routes and allowed for the exploitation of copper and iron mines in Edomite territory. However, after Solomon's death and the division of the Kingdom of Israel, the Edomites managed to regain their independence. In the time of King Jehoshaphat, the Edomites allied with the Ammonites and Moabites to attack Judah, but they ended up fighting among themselves. Later, they joined Israel and Judah to fight against the Moabites. Sometime later, King Amaziah faced a revolt from Edom and killed thousands of Edomites, leaving them weakened for many years. However, during the reign of Ahaz, the Edomites took advantage of a moment of military weakness in the southern kingdom and invaded Judah, even capturing prisoners. Despite having considerable military strength at certain times, the Edomites became known for their cruelty. The biblical prophets described them as ruthless in battle, showing a brutality that went beyond what was common in the wars of that time. The Edomites not only protected their territory, but they also enjoyed attacking the Israelites when they were at their weakest. An example of this treacherous behavior occurred during the fall of Jerusalem, around 587 before Christ. At that time, Edom not only celebrated the Babylonian victory led by Nebuchadnezzar over the people of Judah, but also took advantage of the city's destruction to loot, capture, and even kill refugees who were trying to escape. This act of betrayal was so significant that Psalm 137 expresses the desire for divine retribution against the wickedness of the Edomites. The brutality of the Edomites and their lack of compassion were harshly condemned by the prophets. Instead of acting like brothers and helping in times of need, Edom proved to be a cruel and relentless enemy. Because of this wickedness and betrayal, God decreed the destruction of Edom. Prophets such as Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Obadiah, and Malachi announced judgment against the Edomites. The prophecy of Obadiah is one of the most direct against the Edomites. The book of Obadiah, the shortest among the prophets, is entirely dedicated to condemning Edom. Obadiah's main accusation is that the Edomites first stood by, watching as Jerusalem was invaded and destroyed, and then decided to join Judah's enemies and participate in the destruction. Instead of helping their brothers from Israel, Edom took advantage of the situation, capturing and killing people who were trying to flee the devastated city. Because of this betrayal and cruelty, God's message through Obadiah was harsh. He announced that, for their violence against Israel, Edom would be covered with shame and completely destroyed, with no one left from Esau's descendants, as they would be consumed like fire. God's decree was clear. Edom could not escape its destruction, for God's judgment would be certain, severe, and just. The prophet Malachi also spoke about the judgment of Edom in one of the strongest texts about God's choice. Through Malachi, the Lord said that he loved Jacob but rejected Esau, turning his mountains into desolation and delivering his lands to wild animals. Esau had inherited a promising land, full of riches and in a strategic position, but God left it abandoned. Furthermore, Malachi said that even if Edom tried to rebuild its cities, it would be in vain, for God had already decreed its destruction. This land would be known as the land of wickedness, and its inhabitants as the people who would always face the wrath of God. But what happened to the Edomites throughout history? To understand this, we need to go back to the time when Assyria was rising as a power in the Near East. Around 735 before Christ, the Edomites, who had been under the control of Judah for a long time, regained their independence, but soon became tributaries of the Assyrians. For many years, the high taxes weakened Edom's economy and harmed its prosperity. In 604 before Christ, Edom fell under Babylonian rule, and in 587 before Christ, they allied with Nebuchadnezzar to destroy Jerusalem, taking advantage of Judah's collapse to expand their territory south and establish Hebron as the capital, creating Idumea. However, this period of advantage was short-lived. In the following centuries, the Nabatean Arabs invaded Edom and took Petra as their capital. Some Edomites moved to Idumea, while others were absorbed by the Nabateans. Idumea continued under the rule of other peoples. During the Maccabean revolt, Judas Maccabeus defeated the Idumeans in 164 before Christ, and in 120 before Christ, John Hyrcanus forced them to adopt Judaism. In the Roman period, the Idumeans still had importance, the most famous being Antipater, the father of Herod the Great. This means that King Herod and his family descended from the Edomites. After the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 after Christ, the Idumeans disappeared from history, curiously fighting alongside the Jews in defense against Rome. This event marked the definitive end of the Edomites, fulfilling biblical prophecies. An interesting detail is that in the Bible, among all of Israel's neighbors, Edom was the only nation that did not receive a promise of God's mercy. Now write in the comments if you already knew who the Edomites were in the Bible. Share this teaching with more people, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. May God bless you.